I can heal you, if you give me your leftovers. That innocent little offer. She laughed a bitter, cold, sarcastic laugh. Victoria Whitmore's mansion wasn't just a house. It was a marble prison. For the past 8 years, since the day her legs went numb, she'd locked herself in solitude, consumed by the bitterness of a once powerful woman now reduced to a shadow of her former self. She sat in a gold-plated wheelchair, her cold, steel-blue eyes looking out at the world through the bulletproof glass of her wealth, and found everything utterly meaningless. But today, something unexpected happened. A 12-year-old black boy in worn-out clothes but with bright, sharp eyes stood at the door of the servants' quarters making a ludicrously audacious offer. "Do you really think I'd believe in some garbage magic from a slum kid?" Her voice was like a cold knife cutting through the thin, perfumed air of luxury. It was a statement of her despair that no miracles existed in this world. Daniel Thompson. The boy's name stood there facing the wealthy woman's scornful gaze. He had spent 3 days observing 3 days watching piles of uneaten food while his grandmother and he went hungry in the neighborhood across the street. 3 days of nurturing hope and courage. He had come here not with a plea, but with a promise. "Ma'am, I'm not kidding." Daniel said, his voice strangely calm, even surprising himself. "I can help you walk again. I just need you to give me the food you throw away." Daniel's words didn't sway Victoria. She remained contemptuous, her eyes glinting with mockery. "Listen, kid, I've spent $15 million on the best doctors in the world over the past 8 years. Do you honestly think a street kid like you who probably can't even read can do what no neurologist has been able to?" But Victoria was wrong. The boy in front of her, Daniel Thompson, was no ordinary child. While Victoria only saw a poor kid, a beggar, Daniel saw a bitter woman trapped in her own pain. His trained eyes, honed over years of caring for his grandmother with diabetes, had picked up details Victoria's expensive doctors had overlooked. "You take back pain medicine every day at 2 o'clock in the afternoon." Daniel said, his voice still composed. Victoria was suddenly startled, the mockery on her face replaced with surprise. 3 white pills and 1 blue one. And you always complain that your feet are cold even in hot weather." Victoria's arrogance began to waver. "How do you know that?" she whispered. This boy, had he been watching her? Did he know even her most private habits, things she tried to hide? Daniel had spent weeks observing her through the window, not out of idle curiosity, but because he saw a familiar image. Victoria's symptoms were identical to what his grandmother had experienced before her life-saving surgery. His grandmother was saved by the wisdom of 4 generations of healers, while Victoria clung only to what money could buy. "Because I see what your expensive doctors don't want to see," Daniel replied. "You don't need more pills. You need someone to understand that sometimes healing doesn't come from where we expect it." The boy's words were like a dagger to Victoria's heart. She slammed the door, the heavy wooden door echoing against the marble frame. But before the door closed, Daniel caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. It was no longer just contempt. It was fear. Fear that a poor 12-year-old boy had figured out a truth that none of her experts could find. Victoria Whitmore had made a fatal mistake. She had completely underestimated a boy who had grown up with the lesson that survival required keen observation, patience, and a wisdom that money could never buy. What this rich woman didn't know was that the slum kid carried within him the knowledge of 4 generations of healers. And more importantly, he had just discovered exactly what was wrong with her. 3 days passed, but Victoria couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She was haunted by the question, how did that boy know such private details about her life? About her medication, about the symptoms she carefully hid even from her personal doctor. Finally, curiosity triumphed over arrogance. The next morning, she decided to find out who Daniel was. 1 phone call, a few clicks, and all the information about the boy was on her desk. Daniel Thompson, 12 years old, lived with his grandmother Ruth Thompson in the Riverside Gardens housing projects. No father. Mother died in a car accident. He was an excellent student on a private school scholarship with no criminal record. "Typical," Victoria muttered, flipping through the report. Just a charity case trying to take advantage of a stranger's kindness. But a small detail in the report bothered her. Ruth Thompson, 73 years old, was a retired nursing assistant. Her medical records showed she had once suffered from severe diabetes, but had made a miraculous recovery over the past 2 years. The doctors called it a sudden improvement with no clinical explanation. Victoria dismissed it as an administrative error. What could an old black woman from a public hospital know? She didn't know that across the street, Daniel and his grandmother were preparing for their next step. Victoria's reaction had confirmed Daniel's suspicions. She wasn't truly paralyzed, at least not in the way everyone thought. "Grandma." Daniel sat beside Ruth, his eyes full of focus. "I need you to tell me about the signs of pseudo-paralysis." Ruth Thompson had worked for 40 years as a nursing assistant, but her true knowledge came from a much older lineage. Her great-great-grandmother was a midwife and healer in Mississippi, with knowledge passed from mother to daughter for generations. It was the wisdom of her ancestors that had saved her from the doctor's predictions. "You're very smart." Ruth smiled, her experienced eyes shining with pride. "You saw what I taught, didn't you? Her legs tense up when she doesn't know she's being watched. The muscles react to emotional stimuli." Daniel nodded. He had seen it and he understood. He had found the core of the problem, and he believed he could heal Victoria. In his quiet observation, Daniel had found signs no one else had. Victoria's legs, though immobile, had involuntary twitches, slight jerks when she yelled at her staff, tensing when she felt resentful. These were subtle, almost imperceptible signs, but to Daniel, with eyes trained to see beneath the surface, they were undeniable proof. "She's trapped in her own mind." Daniel mumbled a raw and painful truth. "Her body still works, but her mind has created invisible chains." "Exactly," Ruth replied, her voice filled with understanding. "Psychological trauma manifesting as physical paralysis. I've seen 3 cases like this in the hospital. The wealthy doctors don't want to treat the mind, only the body. It's easier to give out pills than to heal a wounded soul." That afternoon, an unexpected visitor came to Victoria's mansion. A visitor she had long awaited, but never wanted to face the truth he brought. Dr. Hartwell, who had been with Victoria for 8 years, arrived with new test results. He carefully adjusted his expensive glasses, his eyes revealing a hint of confusion. "Victoria, I have to be honest with you," he said, his tone cautious. "These tests show something strange. There's neural activity in areas that should be completely inactive." Victoria gripped the wheelchair's arms, her voice tight with tension. "What does that mean?" "It means that neurologically there is no physical reason for your paralysis. I've suspected this for a long time, but now I'm certain." "Doctor." Hartwell hesitated, knowing his next words would deeply wound her. "Have you considered intensive psychotherapy? Sometimes trauma can manifest physically in ways that, are you saying I'm faking it?" Victoria screamed, her fury erupting like a fire. She didn't want to hear it, couldn't hear those words. "That I've sat in this wheelchair for 8 years for fun." Dr. Hartwell quickly reassured her. "No, not at all. Your paralysis is real, but the cause may be psychological. With the right treatment." Victoria sent him away, slamming the door. But the painful truth remained haunting her. It was more devastating than any terminal diagnosis. If her paralysis was psychological, it meant she had been deceiving herself for 8 years, hiding behind a self-imposed disability. Worse, it meant a poor 12-year-old boy had accurately diagnosed in minutes what she had been in denial about for years. That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She sat staring out the window, looking toward the humble apartment where Daniel lived. A warm, yellow light spilled from the window, and she saw figures moving behind the cheap curtains. A family living on an income not nearly enough to cover her monthly medication bills, yet seemingly possessing a knowledge her money couldn't buy. In that moment, a strange feeling she had long forgotten surfaced: humility. But she immediately crushed it with a renewed burst of anger. "That boy will not humiliate me," she whispered to herself. "I will not let a slum kid make a fool of me." What Victoria didn't know was that at that very moment, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table with his grandmother, carefully planning their next move. He had figured out the kind of person Victoria was. Too arrogant to accept help, too rich to appreciate free wisdom, and too hurt to trust anyone. But Daniel Thompson had learned a valuable lesson from his grandmother. Sometimes to heal someone, you first have to show them just how sick they really are. And while Victoria plotted her revenge against the boy who had exposed her deepest lie, Daniel smiled faintly, knowing that true power always belongs to those who understand that healing never comes from where we expect it. Dying. The next week, Victoria launched a silent but ruthless campaign. First, she called Principal Patterson of the private school where Daniel had his full scholarship. "This is Victoria Whitmore from the Whitmore Foundation," she said, her voice cold. "I want to discuss the inappropriate behavior of a scholarship student, Daniel Thompson. He has trespassed on private property and harassed residents in the area." The call worked. The next day, Daniel was called into the principal's office and given a stark warning: know your place and don't bother the school's benefactors. One wrong move and his only path to a different future would disappear. Not stopping there, Victoria also contacted the manager of Daniel's building, implying that disruptive elements were bothering the neighbors. While the manager couldn't legally evict them, he started making their lives difficult: non-existent noise complaints, threats of fines for imaginary violations, and surprise inspections that always found minor issues. "She's trying to run us out of the neighborhood," Daniel said to Ruth as she brewed the herbal tea they drank every evening. "She wants us to disappear so she doesn't have to face the truth about herself." Ruth Thompson looked at her grandson with experienced eyes. At 73, she had survived decades of racism, workplace prejudice, and attempts to silence her. She recognized the pattern of behavior in those who weaponize power and privilege. "That woman is afraid, boy," Ruth said calmly. "When the rich are afraid of the poor, it's because they know they've done something wrong." Ruth said, her voice quiet but powerful. "And when they're afraid of the truth, they'll do anything to destroy anyone who might expose it." "But Grandma," Daniel was still worried. "What if she takes away my scholarship? What if she runs us out of here?" Ruth smiled the smile of someone who had been through too much to be afraid anymore. "Daniel, let me tell you a story. When your mother was your age, a white doctor tried to stop her from working at the hospital because she knew too much about treatments. He didn't. He used all his influence to hurt her." "What happened?" Daniel asked, his voice eager, realizing his grandmother was about to teach him a fundamental lesson. "She did what our family has always done. She observed, learned, and documented everything. And when the right time came, she used his own knowledge against him," Ruth continued. "The doctor had a very important patient, a rich businessman with the same disease she had already cured in dozens of poor people. When his expensive treatment failed and the patient was about to die, guess who they came to?" "You," Daniel whispered, his eyes lighting up with understanding. "Exactly. And when she saved that man's life with the very methods the arrogant doctor had dismissed, everyone knew who truly understood medicine. He lost his position, his reputation, everything. Not because of revenge, but because the truth always comes out." Daniel began to understand. "Victoria isn't just afraid that I can help her. She's afraid people will find out that she rejected help from someone she considered beneath her." "Now you're thinking like a true healer." Ruth smiled proudly. "We don't just heal bodies, grandson. Sometimes we need to heal the sick soul of an entire society." That night, Daniel began a thorough investigation of Victoria Whitmore. Using the computer at the school library, he uncovered details that completely changed his understanding of the situation. Victoria wasn't born rich. She was the daughter of poor immigrants who married Harrison Whitmore III, the heir to a fortune built on slave labor. The accident that left her paralyzed happened exactly one day after she discovered her husband planned to divorce her for a younger woman. Even more interesting, Harrison died under suspicious circumstances only 2 years later, leaving his entire estate to Victoria. The will had been changed just 1 week before his death when he was hospitalized for a sudden heart attack. Daniel also discovered something that explained Victoria's particular animosity toward him. The Thompson family had worked for the Whitmore family for generations. His great-great-grandfather had been enslaved on the original plantation. His great-grandmother was a maid in the mansion, and his grandmother Ruth had cared for Harrison's mother as she was dying of cancer. But the most revealing detail was in the medical records Ruth had kept secret for decades. Harrison's mother had cured herself of late-stage cancer with traditional methods administered by Ruth. The family doctors never knew the truth, assuming the miraculous recovery was due to conventional treatments that were failing. "Grandma," Daniel said the next morning, his voice steady, "Victoria isn't just physically sick. She's sick with guilt, fear, and shame. Her body is a reflection of the prison she's built for her soul." Ruth nodded proudly. "And now, my grandson, you understand the kind of real healing she needs. not just helping her walk, but making her face who she really is and what she's done. Exactly. But remember, Ruth added, her voice full of gravity, our family has never used our gifts to harm, always to heal, even when the person doesn't deserve it, even when they hate us. Daniel spent the next week observing Victoria with a new understanding. Every cruel gesture she made, every attempt to humiliate him, only confirmed his diagnosis. She wasn't paralyzed by a physical injury, but by a sense of guilt so profound that it manifested as real paralysis. The plan forming in his mind was audacious and dangerous. It wasn't just about proving he could heal her, but about forcing her to confront decades of privilege built on the suffering of others, the lies about her own identity, and the crimes she had buried under a mountain of money. Victoria Whitmore thought she was fighting a poor boy who wanted her leftovers. She had no idea she was about to face 4 generations of accumulated wisdom, a lineage of healers who had survived centuries of oppression, and a young man who carried not only the knowledge to heal her, but also the evidence to destroy her completely. While Victoria planned to publicly humiliate Daniel again, the boy smiled faintly, knowing that every cruel action of hers only confirmed that he had correctly diagnosed not just her physical condition, but the moral decay that was truly imprisoning her. The cure Daniel planned would be far more profound than Victoria could imagine, and far more painful. The final confrontation took place on a Sunday morning when Victoria least expected it. Daniel rang the main doorbell for the first time, no longer using the back entrance reserved for people like him. When Victoria opened the door, she saw not only Daniel, but also Ruth Thompson and a third person who made her blood run cold, a doctor. In the grand foyer of the mansion, there was no sound of a wooden door slamming or mocking insults. Only a tense silence remained. Patricia Williams, the neurologist who had secretly treated Harrison's mother, appeared. She walked in her eyes those of someone who had been held captive by lies and now found liberation. "Good morning, Victoria," Daniel said, his voice unusually calm. "I came to keep my promise. Today's the day you will walk again." Victoria recoiled, trying to slam the door shut, but her arrogance betrayed her. "Oh, what is this joke I've called security?" "Go ahead and call them." Daniel smiled a smile full of confidence. "They'll want to see this too, especially when they find out who you really are." Ruth stepped forward, carrying an old but authoritative leather briefcase. "Victoria Kowalski," she said, her voice echoing through the room. "Daughter of Polish immigrants, born July 19, 1975, married to Harrison Whitmore in 2005, 3 months after finding out he was having an affair." Victoria's face turned ashen. Her real name, the secret she had buried under a facade of wealth, was now exposed. The accident that left you paralyzed happened exactly 1 day after you found out Harrison was going to divorce you. Daniel continued each word. "A knife. Convenient, wasn't it?" Dr. Williams opened a medical file. "I treated Harrison's mother when she was dying of cancer. Ruth here was the one who actually cured her, but the family never knew. I kept all the records, including the neurological exams I conducted for you after the accident. Your tests always showed normal neural activity," she said coldly. "But you paid me handsomely to keep that secret, didn't you? $5 million to confirm a paralysis that didn't exist." Victoria staggered, leaning against the door frame. "You can't prove a thing." Daniel smiled and pulled out a digital voice recorder from his pocket. "I can." He pressed play. Victoria's voice emanated from the device, cold and calculating. "Dr. Williams, I need you to stick with the diagnosis. If Harrison finds out I can walk, I'll lose everything in the divorce. Just confirm the paralysis, and I'll double your payment." "You recorded my private calls," Victoria screamed, her last mask of a victim falling away. "Not just the calls," Ruth said calmly. "Daniel also recorded you walking when you thought no one was looking. 43 videos over 6 months show you walking around the house, even dancing when you thought you were completely alone." Daniel connected his phone to a portable speaker. The videos began to play. Victoria getting up from her wheelchair to reach something on a high shelf, walking normally in the garden early in the morning, even running on a treadmill in the basement gym. "Stop!" Victoria yelled, but her own voice in the videos betrayed her chatting normally with staff when she thought there were no witnesses. "There's more," Daniel said softly, but his words were heavy as stone. "Harrison's medical records. You had his will changed while he was under sedation after his heart attack. The same doctor who confirmed your fake paralysis also forged your husband's death certificate. Dr. Williams bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. She blackmailed me. She said she'd reveal my cover-up of her fake paralysis if I didn't confirm Harrison died of natural causes. Harrison was poisoned, Ruth said with the authoritative voice of someone who had seen similar symptoms for decades in a hospital. Digitalis from the foxglove plant. It kills slowly, mimics a heart attack, and is almost impossible to detect after a few days. Victoria's world of lies completely collapsed. She sank into her wheelchair, her eyes empty. You don't understand. He was going to leave me with nothing. I gave the best years of my life to that man. And now, Daniel said, it's time for the real cure. Get up, Victoria. We know you can. I can't stand, Victoria whispered desperately, clinging to her last lie. Daniel yelled, his voice so commanding that Victoria herself was startled, instinctively jumping up from her chair in a reflex. For a moment, everyone stood silent, looking at the woman who had faked a disability for 8 years now, standing trembling with anger and fear. Congratulations, Daniel said calmly. You're officially cured. Ruth came forward with new documents. These are the reports being sent today to the police, the FBI, and the IRS. Insurance fraud, falsified medical records, tax evasion, and first-degree murder. We've also sent everything to the Washington Post, CNN, and all social media networks. Daniel added, the story of the paralyzed millionaire who killed her husband will be national news tomorrow. Victoria looked around in desperation. There was nowhere to run, no way to deny what had been recorded, documented, and proven. Decades of privilege built on lies and blood had crumbled in minutes, exposing a raw truth and a justice that was executed by a 12-year-old boy. Victoria looked at Daniel, her eyes filled with hate, but also containing a reluctant respect. In the isolated and luxurious space of the room, police sirens began to sound from a distance, like a bell signaling her downfall. You know what the greatest irony is? Daniel asked, helping Ruth put away the documents. Now you'll be truly paralyzed in prison without your millions, without doctors, and without anyone to maintain your lies. The real paralysis, Ruth said, her voice full of wisdom, has always been in your soul, Victoria. You morally paralyzed yourself so long ago that you forgot how to live with dignity. As the sound of police footsteps drew closer up the stairs, Victoria looked at Daniel no longer with arrogance, but with emptiness. How could a 12-year-old boy destroy my entire life? Daniel smiled, the calm smile of someone who had learned that justice sometimes requires patience, observation, and the courage to confront those who underestimate you. It's simple, he replied. You completely underestimated a person who grew up knowing that survival requires wisdom, not privilege. And you forgot that sometimes the most powerful medicine comes from where we least expect it. 6 months later, the transformation was more dramatic than any Hollywood script could imagine. The mansion that was once a symbol of privilege had become the Ruth Thompson Community Center, funded by Victoria's confiscated assets. Daniel, at 14, became the youngest student in Harvard's history with a full scholarship to study medicine. But what made Ruth most proud was that her grandson had turned down dozens of million-dollar interview offers, choosing to continue learning healing secrets from generations of healers. Meanwhile, Victoria, who once threw away expensive meals, was now living in a 200-square-foot cell in federal prison. Her 25-year sentence for first-degree murder would give her plenty of time to reflect. Her trial became a global phenomenon, a reminder that arrogance destroys those who look down on others. Dr. Patricia Williams, the neurologist Victoria once blackmailed, now volunteered at the community center. Daniel showed me that I'd spent 40 years only looking at machines, she confessed. I had forgotten that real medicine begins with observing the whole patient. That boy taught me more in 6 months than decades of expensive specialized study. And Dr. Hartwell, who had taken money to confirm a fake diagnosis, lost his license and became a pharmacy clerk. A perfect irony. The Riverside Gardens community was completely changed. Children who once struggled with hunger now dreamed of becoming doctors and scientists. Daniel had proven that intelligence and determination could defeat any system designed to keep them down. In prison, Victoria actually developed problems with her legs. Stress and depression caused real muscle atrophy, leaving her dependent on a rusty wheelchair borrowed from the infirmary. This chair, cheap and shabby, made her old $15,000 one look like a lost throne. Daniel visited her only once. She looked at him through the bulletproof glass with empty eyes. "Why are you here?" she asked. "To make sure you understand," Daniel replied. "I never wanted to destroy you. I just wanted you to stop trying to destroy us. You're just a kid, and you're a rich adult with all the resources in the world. Who really should have known right from wrong?" Victoria finally understood the extent of her smallness. A 12-year-old boy had shown more wisdom and integrity than her entire life of privilege. Daniel's story became a case study in universities across the country. The Daniel Thompson effect forced institutions to recognize that brilliant minds can come from anywhere. Programs were created to seek out talent in communities traditionally overlooked by academia. Ruth continued to run the center, now expanded to 3 floors of the old mansion, training a new generation of healers. She combined her ancestral knowledge with modern science, proving that true wisdom knows no racial or social barriers. Victoria became an example in criminology classes of how privilege without character leads to self-destruction. The real lesson wasn't about a boy beating a wicked woman, but about how our society overlooks wisdom when it comes from people who don't fit our preconceptions. Daniel had proven that the most powerful healing isn't for the body, but for the toxic beliefs that prevent us from recognizing value in every person, regardless of their skin color, origin, or socioeconomic status. Victoria tried to destroy Daniel, but in the end, she destroyed herself. Daniel learned that true healing isn't just about restoring a broken body, but about transforming minds closed by prejudice into open hearts that recognize greatness where it truly exists.